Mic test. Let me share my screen. Okay, Innatism is under the Innatism, Nativism, Cognitism school of thought, which believes that it's the brain that is the driver of language learning with minimal input from the environment. It all started in Noam Chomsky's criticisms of behaviorism. Noam Chomsky wrote a scathing criticism of B.F. Skinner's verbal behavior. And last time you studied criticisms against behaviorism and contrastive analysis hypothesis. And all those criticisms that led to behaviorism falling into disfavor led to another school of thought in language learning called Innatism. So, according to Noam Chomsky, a child and language learner is actually exposed to bad input, including slurred speech, half sentences, slips of the tongue, mispronunciations. Actually, class, if you record the conversations around you, you will find that there are only a few of the utterances that are properly well formed. Even if you listen to me right now, I have slurred speech, I have half sentences, I have slips of the tongue. So, for example, I'm going to the How does the child know that the is not part of grammar? So, a child or adult second language learner exposed to faulty language, and yet the grammar that they learn is perfect. So, it's like garbage in, gospel out. For computer science, if you input the wrong information, you get the wrong output. But here, even if the input is faulty, the output is perfect. That's one part of the poverty of the stimulus. Here's another part of the poverty of the stimulus. There's nothing that tells us what is ungrammatical. We don't have negative input. So, for example, John himself went to the market. You know that that is grammatical. John went to the market himself. You know that is grammatical. John went himself to the market. You know that this is ungrammatical. How did you know? Did your teacher explicitly teach you that something like this is ungrammatical? No. You just know out of all the input that you receive. So we know that the third example is incorrect not because we were taught or exposed to negative input, but according to Noam Chomsky, that's part of the brain learning grammar. So the brain is able to learn even with faulty input. Now, how does Innatism view errors? Well, according to Innatism, errors are evidence of learners testing out their hypothesis of the language. I have an idea of what French is like. So I'll say something in French, and based on the feedback, it's either I modify my hypothesis of the grammar of French, or I continue to use the grammar that I understand. So errors are not something that we should get rid of immediately, according as taught by behaviorism. Rather, errors actually provide us with insights. For example, at any stage, the grammar is systematic. Errors are only the result of inconsistency with the accepted grammar of adults or native speakers. So inside the brain of the person, the grammar is perfect and systematic. The only reason there seems to be wrong grammar is because it's not consistent with the socially accepted grammar. Okay. Now, overgeneralization is one example of errors providing evidence of what language learners are doing. Class, sheeps, tooths, goat, bringed. Uh, Children do not hear that from adults, and adult language learners do not hear that from native speakers. So they could not have imitated that. Rather, sheeps and tooths are evidence that the language learner or the child is applying the rule of plurals. But then he or she makes that mistake of applying it even in cases where it is the exception. And goad and bring is evidence that the child understands that in order to talk about the past, you use ed, you add ed or id. But then the child applies this rule even to areas or words that should not have been applicable. So he or she would say goad or bring. This is evidence that he or she is applying the rules of the grammar. So overgeneralization shows that learners are applying rules, and overgeneralization shows that learners acquire rules, not habits. It's not habits that are acquired, it's rules. By the way, class, there's only 22 of you. I wonder where the others are. Okay, please tell them to attend our session. Now, Innatis believe that there is a separate faculty of the brain dedicated to language acquisition. Innatis say, yes, we have faculties in the brain for learning math, for learning dates, for memorizing. There are many faculties or parts or portions of our brains dedicated to that. And in addition, there is a specific portion of the brain that is dedicated to acquiring language. And that language acquisition device is found in the universal grammar. Okay, the language acquisition device enables learners to distinguish speech from non-speech sounds. So they understand that the the they are not part of speech. Why? Because they have the language acquisition device. The language acquisition device also enables learners to organize linguistic data into categories that can be further refined, like nouns, verbs. Oh, this noun is different from that noun. It belongs to this category. It belongs to that. The other one belongs to that category. Okay, so we are able to organize linguistic data. Okay, the language acquisition device also enables language learners to know that only a certain structure is possible and others are not. And these are examples of constraints. By the way, class, if we are face to face and we have a blackboard, I would have drawn different wobbly shapes to you. And if I ask you what the shape is, then you would probably be bewildered regarding what shape it is. However, if I tell you that there are only several choices for describing the shape, for example, circle, triangle, rectangle, square, these are the only things you can use to describe the shapes, then it will be very fast for you. The constraints enable us to limit the possible choices we have to take regarding learning grammar. And so, because of that, our learning of grammar is quite fast compared to having all those possible choices. Okay, it's actually rules, not sentences, that are acquired. And that is evidenced by overgeneralization, the application of plurals, the application of past tense markers. So, with a finite set of sounds and words, learners produce infinite number of sentences. We're able to produce sentences and sentences and sentences and sentences. And also, class, frequently you have never heard the same sentence being said before, but you know its meaning. Why? Because it follows the rules that you understand. By the way, class, in your linguistics for teachers subject, your teacher might actually show you a model of what's inside the brain, including what is called the base and the lexicon. So your teacher will explain that to you. Now, Innatis also believe in universal grammar. So Innatis also believe in universal grammar. The universal grammar is the unformed grammar that needs to be molded into specific grammar. So there's a universal grammar inside your head that needs to be molded into specific grammars, like Tagalog, English, Chinese. The universal grammar determines how grammar is shaped through the use of constraints. It tells us what is not possible. It tells us what is possible because of the constraints. Okay, here's a summary of Innatism beliefs. First, language is a human specific faculty. Animals do communicate. Yes, they do communicate, but that communication is not language. Language is a human specific faculty. Another belief of Innatis is that language is a separate faculty from other parts of the brain. Language exists as an independent faculty in the human mind. That is, although it is part of the learner's total cognitive apparatus, it is separate from the general cognitive mechanisms responsible for intellectual development. So, how do you learn? How do you learn science, math, and other subjects? Well, you have your general cognitive mechanisms. But in addition to that, you have what is called the language acquisition device that enables you to learn language much, much faster. Okay? And properties of language that are common to all language, or what we call language universals, are easier to learn than properties specific to only a few languages or to just one language. And this may explain why contrastive analysis hypothesis failed. Okay? So properties of language that are universals, they're easier to learn than properties which are specific only to a few languages. This may explain why contrastive analysis hypothesis failed. Because contrastive analysis hypothesis didn't realize that there are language universals which are easier to learn, and there are language specifics properties that are specific to specific languages. So even though they're different, there's a difference between those languages. If it's a universal, then it's easier to learn. It may be the same between two languages, but if they are properties specific only to a few languages, then they would still be difficult to learn. Okay. So, universal grammar limits the possible options that core grammar rules may take. It is the environment that tells the learner which of the options is to be followed for a given language. So it's already there. For example, it's already an appendage, but it's the environment which will tell you what should appear. Is it a leg? Is it a fin? Is it a wing? So it's the environment that will tell you what it's the environment that will tell the organism what should appear. Okay, now class, there are rules that are not obtained from the universal grammar. This is called markedness. These are rules that are not universal. They're marked. So class, in our English majorship, the word markedness is another word for exception or difference. Okay? And Initists also believe that the primary determinant of first language acquisition is the child's acquisition device, which is genetically endowed and provides the child with a set of principles about grammar. So, for example, this is what the grammar should look like. This is what the grammar should look like. Okay. So the primary determinant of first language acquisition is the child's acquisition device, which is genetically endowed and provides the child with a set of principles about grammar. And according to Innatis, the acquisition device atrophies with age. It also grows old, specifically after puberty. It begins to deteriorate rapidly. That's why adults are unable to achieve native-like proficiency, except in contrast to children learning the language. Okay, and Innatis also believe that the process of language acquisition consists of hypothesis testing, by which the grammar of the learner's mother tongue is related to the principles of the universal grammar. So, you as the language learner would test out your hypothesis by talking to people, and depending on the feedback, you modify your hypothesis or you stay with your hypothesis. So, the grammar of the mother's tongue is related to the principles of the universal grammar. And the universal grammar provides constraints which limit the formation of the grammar. Those limits enable us to learn language quickly. So in conclusion, class, language is all in the mind. So what will happen is we will take a break and I will see you at 2 o'clock. Ay, bakit yan? There you go. So I will see you at 2 o'clock.